accessed the podcast of OA. Located deep within Sector 14845 and powered by the Emerald Light of Will, the podcast of OA is your guide to the Green Lantern universe. Hosted by Lantern Myron Rumsey, the podcast of OA begins now.
Hey, Green Lantern fans, you're listening to the podcast of OA, episode number 215. In this episode, Phil and I are going to count down our top 5 favorite Green Lantern villains, a conversation I'm really looking forward to. Phil, my friend, we're here for another episode. I'm glad to be chatting with you tonight.
Me too. You know, and it's funny because you and I play this dance where we're getting ready to record, and it's all of a sudden just life happens. Oh, I can't. Oh, yeah, I can. Hey, I can. Hey, we're going to have to do it here. Hey, we're going to have to do it there. We keep putting it off. And it's like, life happens. Life gets in the way. And you know what? I hate when it happens. I feel bad when it happens on my side. But it is what it is. And here we are, and we get to laugh about it.
Yeah, I feel awful when that happens. It's like we have good plans, and then, like you said, life happens, and it gets in the way, and stuff goes on, and away you go, you know? But... Right. I just turned 58 a couple weeks ago, so I make no more excuses. Just life happens.
58. I'll be, happy birthday. I'll be 49 in January.
Well, I got to tell you is once 50 hits, that check engine light starts coming on, man. And
I think mine came on at 40.
Well, before we start talking about our favorite Green Lantern villains, I'm really excited to talk about that. We got a little bit of Green Lantern news, not a lot of stuff going on. A lot of it circling around collectibles. Todd McFarlane Toys really going to town. You know, they released that Blackest Night wave not too long ago, and now they've come up with this Page Puncher line, and wave 2 is going to have a Green Lantern figure. And I don't know if you've seen these at all, Phil, but they're a small figure, you know, like the old classic superpower size.
Yeah, that buddy of mine got me that John Stewart one.
Yeah, they're that size figure, but they're bundled with a comic book with an iconic story for the character. So this is going to be issue 1 of Green Lantern Rebirth. So that's really cool.
That's a really cool one, yeah.
Yep. And then they just kind of stealth released a variant of the Kyle Rayner Blackest Night figure. It's Kyle Rayner in his original costume, which is kind of interesting because it was not really announced, and it just started showing up on Target shelves. Apparently, it's a Target exclusive. So that's kind of exciting for people who like his original uniform. To be able to get a figure of that. Unfortunately, they went with the same pea green color, which I didn't particularly care for on the Blackest Night figure, but that's interesting. And then this weekend is New York Comic Con, and Funko has 2 figures tied into Green Lantern there. There's actually going to be a Star Sapphire pop and a John Stewart soda figure from their soda can line, with, of course, the Chase variant, which gets into that whole, you're buying a bunch of figures trying to get one, but
this stuff's starting to get expensive.
Oh, I know. The Larfleeze Chase figure is selling for like $100, and I'm like, man, you know, I'd like to have it, but $100 for a small piece of plastic. As I get older, I'm starting to think about, you know, I've bought all this stuff. What's going to happen to it all? I'm starting to become less of a completionist because I'm like, it's just stuff.
I mean, it is, but it's like, well, like you and I talked, you know, going over the course of the past couple months, and I've been really getting into the Game of Thrones stuff, and like I got in the back of my head, I got this itch where like all these pop figures are coming out, you know, with House of the Dragon and everything, and it's like, oh, I want that, but I have to pull myself back. Be good, Phil. So what did? I go out and order a World of Ice and Fire, this really nice bound copy. It was like $70.
But you know, it's funny because when you're younger, and you know, we've all been there. When you're younger, you're you know, you don't exactly have a lot of expendable income, and then as you kind of get on in life, and you stick to a job long enough, and you start getting that expendable income, little things become like that just become easier to get onto, and then the next thing you know, you become like a hoarder because it's stuff that you couldn't get before or stuff that you missed out on and that you're buying secondhand and stuff.
I'm a big fan of like, and this goes back well before like college, back to high school, you know, and all through grad school. And I'm a big fan. I like books, you know, and I read a lot. And I have a massive collection here at the house, and I got more stuff at my mom and dad's house that I've yet to bring over. But I've always thought about, like, a lot of people I know, or a lot of friends of mine have, parsed a lot of theirs, got rid of a lot of titles just to free up some space or whatever. But I don't know, books you invest in. Same with comic books, I mean, they're there for the duration, and yeah, they use up a lot of space, but I like my collection of books and comic books, and I love having the tangible stuff. I mean, the collectibles are great when you can afford them when they come out at such rapid pace, but the books are where it's at for me.
Well, and that's exactly the point. When you and I were younger, there wasn't a lot to have to buy. You could afford to be a completionist, right?
Right.
I think the first Green Lantern action figure was the Superpowers figure, and after that, there wasn't one for a long time until the Jeff Johns era, and pop culture became such a the geek inherited the earth, and now you can't sneeze without finding a collectible of some sort. It's so much harder to be a completionist now, and it just. You get to a point where, like, my room is, I've got so much stuff now. If I buy anything new, I have to take something out. I have to go put something in storage because I really don't have any more room left.
Well, and then you got the issue, like, with so, like, like, when you mention all these collectibles and stuff, and then they come out with these exclusives, right? And there's only so many of those made, and then the next thing you know, you're not going to be able to get an exclusive. But then the only place you're going to be able to get it is when it pops up on eBay the day following, or whatever. And then the next thing you know, it's never the shelf price. It's always like quadruple that, And it's like the Samurai Jack. There's a Samurai Jack pop figure I want with him and Naku, and it's 300 and something plus bucks. And it's like, oh my gosh, I want it so bad, but think how much stuff I could get for $300 and something.
Yeah. Well, and the frustrating thing is there are people out there that rush to the store to buy those exclusives, buy them en masse, and then jack the prices up on the secondary market. And the average person doesn't have an opportunity to get them off the store shelves.
I used to punk on those Target guys all the time that did that, man. I had a bunch of buddies that used to do that. I'm like, man, you guys are jerks. I go, it's not cool. That's not cool to kids, man, just taking that stuff and, jacking up prices.
Yeah.
They do it all the time.
It's why I kind of don't like the exclusive stuff, or, the convention exclusives. I understand why they do it, but the prices get so expensive. And for somebody who really loves, for example, the Star Sapphire figure, if you really, really, really love Star Sapphire and you really want to have that figure to add to your Funko Pop collection, unless they put it on sale or they do a retail partnership, which is what they usually do, but I haven't seen anything for these two figures is where they're going to be commercially available. You're stuck paying a lot more money and price gouging on the secondary market. It is what it is.
And it is. Like my Wonder Twins pops, I mean, they didn't make a lot of those, and I had to have them, and I paid an arm and a leg to get them, and it was worth it in the end to me because I know I have them and nobody else does. I don't think anybody else wanted them anyway, but at the same time, it's probably one of my favorite collector pieces, and it's not Green Lantern, but still, I went out of my way to do it, and I set money aside to do it, and that's kind of what you have to do. It's a little bit aside, little bit aside, little bit aside, but growing up, it never really worked that way. I mean, sure, we saved our piddly allowance that we got back then, and usually we'd go up to the corner, and what did we spend it on? Candy and comic books, and that's how it went. I mean, until along came video games, and you're a lot older, and then you're saving up to buy those.
Right.
The times change. Anyway, we're old.
Yep. Anyway, we could spend a whole bunch of time talking about that, but we're here to talk Green Lantern, and
right.
we got a couple of things to talk about. One of them being our top 5 favorite Green Lantern villains, and so we'll take a break. You've got a fun Know Your Core segment to go over, and then we'll come back and we'll talk some Green Lantern stuff.
All right.
Listen up, all you white circles. This is Drill Instructor Kilowog, and you're listening to the podcast of Oa. And don't you forget it, boozers.
Fellow Owens, welcome back to another Know Your Core segment. Put on your seatbelts and strap in for a good one. This bloke goes by the name of Bloobert Cob. Bloobert Cob was present when the Corps learned of Hal Jordan's apparent death at the hands of Dr. Polaris and participated in Hal's funeral. That is all that Bloobert Cob is known for. His first appearance was in Green Lantern Volume 2, number 46, July 1966. The creators are John Broome and Gil Kane. Thank you, Bloobert Cob, for your royal service in Hal's funeral. Thank you, fellow Owens, for another awesome member of the Know Your Core segment.
In brightest day, in blackest night, no evil shall escape my sight. Let those who worship evil's might beware my power, Green Lantern's light!
So, Phil, before we start chatting about our favorite Green Lantern villains, I wanted to talk just a little bit about the state of DC Comics and what's coming up in the future. The December 2022 solicitations came out not too long ago, and December marks the 8th month without a Green Lantern-centric title, an ongoing book. And it looks like after Dark Crisis, I almost said Infinite Crisis. After Dark Crisis, DC is supposedly doing something in 2023, kind of a dawn of the DC universe. So it looks like, I don't want to say it's a reboot, but it's almost like another reboot. So I thought, it'd be kind of fun to talk about what we would like to see the Green Lantern franchise look like in 2023. So, Phil, I'll let you go first. What would you like to see Green Lantern look like in the dawn of the DC?
Well, I'd like to see, overall I'd like to see a Green Lantern Corps book. I think the fans are due that. And, we can all sit here and we can all moan about who we want to see and who should be the main people and yada, yada, yada. That's not my point. My point is you can have a leader of the Green Lantern Corps, but it doesn't have to be a named leader of the Green Lantern Corps. And if you're going to do a book, you do a book universally with them all, and have it all inclusive, Sure, there's always going to be your front runners. I get it. You're going to have your fan favorites. But at the same time, we don't need Hal Jordan and John Stewart and the Green Lantern Corps, or Kyle Rayner and Guy Gardner and the Green Lantern Corps. Just make it a Green Lantern Corps. That's it. And just start showcasing all your talent. You could open up a whole entire pool on a Green Lantern Corps book, and you could do it in a way where you'd have a monthly title, and you could have a different artist work on each book, a different writer tell a different story every bi-monthly. You got so much talent out there in your pool. And give people a chance to write, and at the same time, if you offer that kind of opportunity to writers and artists, you never know what kind of results that might yield.
Yeah.
I think that would be a good marketing tactic for them, but that's one main thing I'd like to see in the DC.
I would like to see 2 ongoing books. I'd like to see, obviously, a Green Lantern title. I'd prefer to star Hal. That's just personal preference. Mm-hmm. And then I'd like to see a Green Lantern Corps book that has, Kyle and John and Guy in it. But I'd also like to see both books have backup features of a Tales of the Green Lantern Corps.
Yeah.
Just because people keep talking about how much they miss Green Lantern Corps quarterly. And I think if you put a backup feature, you gave writers and artists an opportunity to do small mini stories. They could even be 2-parters, or 3-parters, because they're backup stories. But to spotlight other characters, to introduce new ones, you could even do crossovers, what have you. I just think something like that, or even a third title if you wanted to go that far, a third title that is Green Lantern Corps quarterly back again. But maybe you seed it by starting it now with backup features, and if it's popular enough and you get good feedback, spin it off into a third book.
Yeah, that's a good idea too. Yeah, you're right.
But I would ultimately like DC just to get Green Lantern back out there. It seems like we kind of crescendoed during the Johns era, and I think DC kind of fumbled the ball when Johns left. I think, you and I both like Robert Venditti as a human being and as a writer, but it was really unfortunate to put him in there when he was kind of an unproven commodity to a lot of the DC fans. Mm-hmm. And Van Jensen, who had never done a mainstream book in his life, I think he'd only done 1 title prior to Green Lantern Corps. Those guys got stuck in there and inheriting this franchise with huge expectations. and it was impossible for them to live up to that. I think DC would have been smarter had they brought in a big name person to kind of carry it on that would have kind of kept the momentum going a little bit. But when you brought Robert Venditti in and you used his lights out pitch, lights out really turned, it literally did turn lights out on the franchise, because a lot of people walked away during Lights Out because they didn't like that story that much. And no fault of Robert Venditti. I think he's a great person. I think had he been given more control than he was given to write the series. If you look at his Hal Jordan and the Green Lantern Corps run versus his regular Green Lantern run, there's a big difference in quality. And a lot of that is because DC didn't interfere with the Hal Jordan book as much as it did with the Green Lantern book.
Right.
But, all right, my friend. Well, we have some fun stuff to talk about. We did a while ago, it was episode 194 back in May of last year. We did our favorite top Green Lantern characters. And so it's only fitting that we do our top 5 villains as well. And now these are not the best. These are our personal favorites. So we're not trying to say these are the best characters out there, yada, yada, yada. These are our personal favorites. And I found this more difficult than naming my top 5 Green Lanterns. How about you?
Mine was easy. I had 3 locked in. The other two were kind of like, well, I'm only really, really interested in 3, but if I had to pick another 2, I put them on there. And surprisingly enough, one didn't appear on there that most people would probably think would. I'll put it that way.
Okay. Well, I know I've got a few honorable mentions, just like I did in the Green Lanterns one. I really like the Controllers, Krona, Necron, and Appa-Ali-Apsa, the Mad Guardian. Those just missed the cut going into this. But I'll start with my number 5. And I kind of cheated a little bit, of course. But my number 5 was Atrocitus and the Red Lanterns.
Okay. That's a good one.
Atrocitus first debuted in December 2007 in Green Lantern Volume 4, number 25. And the Red Lanterns was kind of the first big expansion on the whole emotional spectrum thing. And I always found it interesting. One of the things I liked about Jeff Johns' emotional spectrum theory was that the further you got from the center of the spectrum, the more the emotion controlled you than you controlled it. And anger and rage certainly fits in. And to me, it was so brilliant to think of, seeing red was always about being angry. So it was such a perfect fit. And to see characters who maybe weren't necessarily evil, but driven by their rage. And some of it, like the character of Bleez, who has such a tortured history, you kind of are almost rooting for them because you can understand their feelings of anger. And I just thought it was such a great spin. So I really liked of all the new cores that Jeff Johns introduced and all the use of all the different colors, I felt like the reds were the best of the new additions. Yeah,
I like it. All right, so I guess I'll do my number 5.
Yeah, go ahead.
All right, my number 5, I'm going to go with Necron. Created by Mike Barr, Len Wein, Joe Staton, and an honorable mention to the fact that his first appearance was in Tales of the Green Lantern Corps. There you go, June '81.
Yeah. A lot of people don't know that story, and so they think of Blackest Night as the only time that Necron ever came around. Right. Very different looking version of Necron.
Sure it is. It's like Black Hand, same thing,
Yeah. If people haven't read the Tales of the Green Lantern Corps mini, that's one that's really worth seeking out, because that was a good story.
It is. And Necron, of course, goes without saying. I mean, he was just one of the pivotal characters in Blackest Night. I mean, his early stuff is it's okay. I mean, I've only read a little bit of his early stuff, but Blackest Night was the ultimate moment for him, and he shined. And no one can argue the fact that he wasn't menacing in that series.
It's such an awesome redesign too.
Yeah.
Have you seen the Todd McFarlane oversized figure that came out?
I have. It's way out of my price league.
So on to number 4. Number 4 for me is kind of an odd character for a lot of people. I think might be surprised that I'm including this one. But this is from June 1965, issue number 37 of Green Lantern, Evil Star. I thought Evil Star was kind of like, I want to say almost like the Green Lantern version of the Joker. I mean, Evil Star is a scientist who is so obsessed with staying alive longer, he creates this star band, and it basically destroys his entire planet to keep him alive. And now he's so old that if he takes the band off, he would die of old age. And you see it in the Morrison run. He actually shows up, and these guys, some evilly type people, took the band off of him as an act of torture. And he's aging, and that's the scene you see with Hal and him in the hospital wing of Space Hospital. But I thought Evil Star was such a cool thing in the Starlings. It was such a cool riff on a sci-fi villain that, you know, the band drives him. It's such a thing where the band makes him insane and drives him to do evil things. But if he takes it off, he dies.
That's cool. That's really cool. Evil Star, huh?
Yep, Evil Star. Evil Star was really kind of an interesting. You always see the Starlings and stuff. They always show him, but it's a classic John Broome creation.
That's cool. Evil Star. Well, I like it.
Your number 4.
My number 4. All right. Well, I'm not going back too far. We're going to go to Green Lantern Volume 4, number 25, December 2007. A character created by Jeff Johns, Ethan Van Sciver. And I give you the one and the only Larfleeze. Because Larfleeze is just the coolest abomination of a villain character that can exist. Now, I hesitated in putting him on my list because he's a villain, but to me he's a villain, but he's not, because he's more of a bumbling moron that makes mistakes and still wants to be good or still wants to try to do the right thing, but can't. Now, I will say the Christmas special is probably one of my favorite comic books that exist. I mean, it's just the Larfleeze. I mean, and then the cookies that come every Christmas. And not to mention that I just love how all of his his things, his creations are just all these orange entities just around him. And he's the only guy. He's the only one. I've always dug him. I always thought he was cool.
Well, and that ties into my love of the Red Lanterns, is that, again, it's further away from the center of the spectrum, and so greed becomes this all-consuming thing. It was such a great thing, and again, such a tragic character.
Yeah. I mean, it really is. I'd like to see, it would really be interesting if they did a one-shot where he went to the Blue Lanterns, and he became like the icon for hope. Anyway, yeah, the most tragic character. Yeah, I like Larfleeze. I wish they had a stuffed animal Larfleeze. I don't think they do.
Yeah, I think they kind of missed the boat with that.
Yeah, but he gets he's like the Jar Jar Binks of the Green Lantern universe, I feel like.
I always love the fact that he could go from that funny. I don't want to say funny because it's the absurdity of his greed. He can go from this almost laughable character to you're scared for your life the next moment, and he can flip on a dime, which is really neat.
He's vicious looking.
Oh yeah,
but he's comical, and I don't know. I just always loved him. I've always adored him.
So we'll go on to number 3. My number 3 goes back to 1977. Steve Englehart created these characters, because it isn't a single character, debuted in Justice League number 140. It's the Manhunters.
Oh, there you go.
I always have felt that the Manhunters were such a great cautionary tale on too much trust in technology. And as a technologist, this probably sounds odd to hear that coming from a technologist, but
it's very true, though. I mean, it's still relevant. Yeah.
And that it was the driving reason why the Guardians created the Green Lanterns, because the Manhunters screwed up. And I've always felt they were such a cool set of villains, and you could always do different things with them. You know, we saw them in the Green Lantern animated series as kind of the pawns of the Anti-Monitor, but then we saw them in the comics as a perfect pairing for Cyborg Superman. So they offer so many different things. I loved when Jeff Johns kind of reintroduced them during his run, and he made it so that they could absorb the power from a power ring. And I think one of my favorite scenes from the first year of the Johns era is that whole scene where Hal has jumped out of an airplane and he's recharging his ring on the body of a manhunter as he's falling from the sky.
Yeah, we did that retro, yeah.
Yeah, it was such a neat scene. I always also felt, too, that the Manhunters would have been better choices as the main villains for the Green Lantern movie. Mm-hmm. Early days of CGI, it would have been easy. You're making one version of the model, you know.
Well, not only that, it's relevant to the times, you know, with AI the way it is.
Yeah, yeah. So what's your number 3?
My number 3 is going to be an oddball, and I'm sure a lot of you might be surprised. I don't know if you'll be surprised, but I don't know. Anyway, Controller Moo.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, I love the fact that he's like this like space cult leader, you know, and he looks like this esteemed general, like from an alien race, you know, and he's got this like basically like the Black Stars as his bodyguards, you know, and I've always liked him. And, you know, oddly enough, he's a newer type of villain because he was created by Morrison and them. But, yeah, I like Controller Moon, man. My guy.
Yeah, it was a neat character. Kind of I don't want to say underutilized, but it hasn't been visited since.
No.
And there's so much potential
before
there.
That either, so.
Yeah.
The Dark Stars. Gotta love it.
Yep. So number 2, I haven't heard you mention this character yet. I know it's coming, but my number 2 comes from Green Lantern Volume 2, number 29, John Broome, Gil Kane creation, William Hand, Black Hand.
There you go.
Great character.
Your number 2, huh?
Yeah, he's my number 2. Yep. And I think it's primarily. I mean, if you go back to Black Hand pre-Johns, he wasn't that great of a character. He was pretty much your typical villain. He didn't really have a lot going for him.
Well, if you think about it like this, he wasn't scripted as the menacing character that he was made out for. Specifically, you could say for Blackest Night.
Yeah. I mean, he really was just one of those cliche villains who develops a weapon that counters the power ring kind of thing. But when Johns reintroduces him, man, he takes such a dark turn and is such a menacing character, like you said, because he just absorbs the life force out of people. It just very creepy. He becomes a much, much greater threat in the hand of Jeff Johns.
Good choice. Excellent.
All right. Your number 2.
My number 2, Cyborg Superman. Always going to be up there. Now, I will say this about Cyborg Superman. He's a newer-ish villain for Green Lantern Corps, only because I feel like he's only utilized when Dan Jurgens started writing Green Lantern. So, I mean, pre-Dan Jurgens, I don't think he appeared in any of the Green Lantern titles.
He was part of the Sinestro Corps War.
Oh, that's right. I forgot that came before that. You're right. Anyway, yeah, he's one of my favorites. I mean, he will always be one of the ultimate best. And what I like about him is that he's not like a paramour for Superman over in his books. You know, I like the fact that he's utilized in a different style over in the Lantern books a lot, because I feel like he fits that kind of mod, and I feel like he fits well in with the New Gods too. And I feel like those all kind of incorporate well together with this universe.
Yeah, I think Cyborg Superman is one of those really versatile characters, and for Green Lantern, obviously it goes all the way back to the destruction of Coast City.
Sure. But
then he becomes almost a sympathetic character that he wants to die, you know. It becomes very, very interesting for him. But obviously there's so much history there that when he interacts with the Green Lanterns, and especially with Hal because of the whole Coast City thing, it really kind of ramps things up because it's not just taking down a villain. It's very personal.
It is. And he's smart. I mean, he's really, really, really a smart villain. I mean, a lot of his story arcs that he appears in, and a lot of the stuff that he does, yeah, I mean, he's made some, villain mistakes, like every villain makes mistakes in the history of comic books. But at the same time, a lot of his tactics are pretty smart, you know. And I like his utilization of every technological component that's around him. I mean, the man can't die.
Yeah, and I think one of the things in using him in Green Lantern was that whole technology piece got played up more, because it's always been, he's been another version of Superman. So it's his strength and his ability to fly and all those things. But when he shows up in Green Lantern, it goes back to that sci-fi stuff where, as you mentioned, hacking technology and those kinds of things. I mean, him partnering with the Manhunters, it's a perfect pairing. It really is.
Yeah, it really is. It was cool.
All right. Well, my number one, it should be no surprise, because how can you have a top 5 greatest Green Lantern villains and not mention Sinestro? So it goes back to Green Lantern number 7 from 1961, John Broome, Gil Kane creation, and of course the whole Sinestro Corps that spills out of that, which came in 2006 with Green Lantern Volume 4, number 10. I know when we first saw Arkillo show up, I think he was really the first one that we saw show up and get a yellow ring. We knew something big was coming. And many people say the Sinestro Corps War is the greatest Green Lantern story ever written. And I don't think I would necessarily argue with that, but Sinestro obviously started as a traditional mustache twirling villain in the hands of John Broome and Gil Kane. But there was more to the story, and it got fleshed out over time. And what I like about Sinestro is, I mean, obviously the whole fear, willpower thing goes together really, really well. But Sinestro has interesting relationships with a number of the Green Lantern characters. Obviously, his strongest relationship and his strongest dynamic is with Hal, but he also has a great dynamic with Kyle. And I always thought it would be interesting if Sornik Natu and Kyle got back together again, how Sinestro is the father-in-law character. Would really be interesting. But I think that he's just got such history, such rich history, and he's not just a villain for the Green Lanterns. He's an arch villain. He's diametrically opposed, yet like the Green Lanterns, his goal under his rebirth of his concept, his goals are still noble in a way. It's his methods that are the problem. And it poses a lot more philosophical questions about, using violence to get to the means of achieving peace. And it poses a lot more in-depth conversation, in dialogue, to debate things like corporal punishment and things like that. There's so much fodder there that it makes it interesting. And the characters that were created to go along with Sinestro and some of the, the Green Lantern, or the Sinestro Corps members are really spooky, scary characters. I mean, Crib and Mush or Slush and Carousel and all those characters that came out of the creation of the Sinestro Corps created such a beautiful variation on the Green Lantern Corps mythology.
Yeah, speaking of which, Lissa Drax is one of my runner-ups.
Oh, yeah. Another great character. There's so many good characters that have come up, in this whole revamping of the Green Lantern mythology. Yep. So that said, Phil, what's your number one?
Black Hand.
Black Hand. I knew it. I knew it was going to be Black Hand.
Yeah. Not much more can be added to what you already said. The Macabre. I will say one of my favorite. Well, let's put it like this. I like how he's like the Dahmer. He's like this Dahmer character. Real dark. One of my favorite scenes, one of my favorite panels is when he's lying in that grave with the skeleton. And,
oh, yeah.
And it's like, dude.
Yeah.
You're just off the charts, but I got to see where you're going with this.
Well, what I think is so interesting, and when you look at some of the characters that we've mentioned in our top 5, a lot of them play off of their opposition to will, whether it's rage or whether it's fear or whether it's death. All of those types of characters push the Green Lantern characters to confront things which could not only kill them, but things that are psychologically challenging. They're things which provoke strong emotion, and overcoming those things. And it's a great metaphor for life.
And it really is, because if you take Han, for example, where the guy was basically raised around death. So you're talking about somebody who has no empathy, has no sympathy, has no anything. He's like a blank slate. He just death is his only barometer that he goes by. But if you bounce that off of, like you said, a rage component or, a love component or a willpower, there's going to be different variations of pushback you're going to get from different emotions that are coming at you from that different spectrum, you know. And a lot can be played off of him alone with just that concept, you know. But he will always be probably my favorite villain in the DC, period. He always has been, you know. I like some of Superman's stuff, and, you know, the Flash has his rogues, and that's cool, and Batman can just go fly out off a building somewhere. I don't care. But Black Hand, I mean, he's probably my favorite DC villain ever. I always thought he'd be cool in the Legion of Doom.
Oh yeah. That would be interesting. One of the things that going through this exercise did for me was it underscored, as you know, Jeff Johns has become a controversial figure of sorts, but one of the things that he did is he not only revitalized the Green Lantern franchise, he reestablished some really strong opposing characters for the Green Lanterns to have to deal with. And a lot of people have said over the years that Johns is better at writing villains than he is heroes. And I think it's because he really looks at these characters and tries to find a way to elevate them. You know, there's the whole writing theory of your hero is only as good as their villain is. So if you elevate the villain, that forces your hero to get elevated as well. And I wholeheartedly agree. When you look at these characters, Johns really took some minor characters. I mean, I would argue that Sinestro, while he wasn't a minor character, has never been as well written as he has been since Green Lantern Rebirth. But you look at what he did with Hector Hammond and any of those characters that we've seen through the Johns run, they've been raised to such a level that it forces the Green Lantern characters to rise to the occasion, and it makes the stories that much more powerful and memorable.
I mean, the same could be said for Flash Rebirth too. I mean, he pulled the same kind of trigger with that, opening up the Flash universe for a lot of bigger things, and a lot of the writers that have came since him have built off of that legacy. You know, and that's kind of one of the things that makes me sad about the Green Lantern stuff, because Johns put such a huge baseline down for what our model to be built off of, you know, yet a lot of it is still just neglected to this day, you know, even by writers that have come much later, you know, since it's happened quite some time ago. When you're talking, what, 15 years now? God.
Yeah, the Green Lantern Rebirth was in 2004.
2004, right. I mean, you're almost 20 years off the mark. And a lot of writers have come and gone since then, plus your gaps when you don't have as many books. But there's so much potential baseline material back there that should be pulled forward that I think is still relevant today. But
oh yeah, I mean the idea of having the willpower to overcome things is very, very relevant. I think that's one of the things that the Johns run kind of gets overlooked for, is the fact that it's very relatable. I've talked in the past in episodes long time ago about how I felt like a power ring was a great tool for educating children and helping them overcome their fears. It becomes almost like a talisman to kids to help them focus on how they can deal with fear and overcoming it. It's a good metaphor. And go ahead.
And to add on that, I mean, Clark has a book that he reads that we read to him sometimes, and it and it's a color book. It's called a color book. But what it is these different color monsters, and they're depicted in their apparent color and its association with their emotions. So there's like this red little monster guy, and he's angry and he's mad, you know, and so on and so forth. Well, we've seen it in the kids show that's on Disney, Inside Out or whatever it is. You know, it explored all those emotions. I mean, you could do the same thing with a kid's book with the emotional spectrum and the Green Lantern Corps and have the same effect on children and get readers. Yeah,
very much so. And I think that's one of the things that the Johns run really excelled at, was it built such a great tapestry. It didn't throw away what was happened before. It maybe ignored certain aspects, but it really built up the entire franchise, and it showed what potential it has always had, just that it never really had someone tackle it in the way that he tackled it. But yeah, I think our choices of villains were really good. I'm interested in seeing if some of our listeners respond with their top fives, just to see what other characters they're thinking of that are their favorites, that maybe weren't ones that kind of rose to the top of our lists. But
or you could do a poll on your the website and put some top ones up there and vote, and then have people write in if they have their favorite or type it in or whatever.
Yeah, it's a fun exercise of trying to think of things, and it makes you want to go back and reread stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And I think if there's anything that's frustrating, I think when we talked about Larfleeze before, part of what frustrated me with the Larfleeze series was because I saw so much potential in that character, and they went for the funny, but they didn't go for the other side of the coin.
Yeah, I don't think the writers knew what to do at that time.
Yeah,
and he's tough. I'll be honest with you, he would have been a tough character for anybody to pick up at such an early stage of when he was created. That he didn't have a lot of baseline for what somebody could have built upon. So I mean, it probably would have been tough for any writer to take that.
I think what happened was that DC was so pleased with the performance of that Christmas book that they thought, well, hey, let's give him an ongoing. But I think Larfleeze, like some of these other characters, are some that have to kind of come in and out. If you use them too much, they lose what makes them special.
That's very true.
I think if you look at, for example, Black Hand, who is one of our favorite characters, obviously you're number one. If he gets overused, he doesn't have the shock and impact that he has. He almost becomes, well, hey, we got to move him off the stage, so now he's not as big of a threat because he's cycled in and out too easy.
Well, in case in point, I mean, he's been used recently, but look at the last time he's had a major impact, and that was Blackest Night.
Yeah. Yep.
And that's been quite some time ago.
Venditti used him, I think, pretty well during his run.
Yeah.
But since then, he really hasn't been utilized very well. And unfortunately, I think that's true for large parts of the Green Lantern mythology and the whole franchise, is that it hasn't been used particularly well.
Oh, yeah, that's true, especially in the last year.
Yep.
Don't say the last two.
All right, friends. Well, we're going to come back and talk about your listener feedback in just a moment. We'll see you in a minute.
This is Giancarlo Volpe, producer of Green Lantern, the animated series, and you're listening to the podcast of OA.
Greeting, fellow OANs. The first message is a voicemail from Lincoln, who has some comments on the recent Dark Crisis Green Lantern special. Transmitting audio file in 3, 2, 1.
Myron and Phil, this is Lincoln, a huge John Stewart fan because of the Mosaic comic. In your review of the Dark Crisis GL one-shot, you questioned John's setting with his mother and sister. It makes more sense if we remember issue 147 of Winnick's GL run, where it's related that when John was 15, he took his aunt's car without permission and was hit by a drunk driver. John had his dog Rose with him, and she was killed. But in this issue, adult John discovers that he had repressed the memory of ever having a sister. In fact, his sister had died in the accident, and the family did not own a dog. With this accident in mind, it makes more sense that John would bring back his little sister. The curveball is that the sister's name is Rose in the Winnick story and Eleanor in the one-shot. Although I like the one-shot overall and its stress on John as architect, I did wonder why no other heroes exist in this reality other than Green Lanterns. Keep up the good work.
Hey, Lincoln, thanks for reaching out, and thanks for leaving the voicemail. It makes my job a little bit easier. And also, thank you for pointing out the whole John Stewart story from the Judd Winnick era of Green Lantern during the Cal Rayner run. I did not read that story, so I'm glad you kind of recounted it for us, because I am not familiar with it at all. And I agree, it adds layers to John's story, and it certainly makes this one a better read. I think my main problem with the story wasn't so much that story. It was the fact that if this is John's perfect universe, why would Hal be Parallax, and why would we not see Kat Matui? To me, it just felt like the things that seemed like obvious things that John would want in his perfect world weren't a part of it. But thanks for sharing that whole story. For people that want to read that, you can go back and pick those issues up. I think they're out there. I don't think they've been collected.
And that's good to add context to what, because I didn't know that either, and it's neat to know that it's a reference point. I like that. It does help John's character somewhat. I think it helps me a little bit to know that, okay, well, at least it's a reference point that was pulled from someplace, that adds context to what I read myself. Even though I'm not familiar with that, or I'm not big into Jon Stewart, there is a link there that, that's cool to point out. And thanks for doing that, Lincoln.
Yeah, it's interesting because the whole point of this is a story about John. The issues that he's talking about. He mentions it's issues 147 of the Winnick run. John basically makes a mistake as a teenager, and psychologically, like in MASH, when you see you remember like in the finale of MASH where Hawkeye's holding talk about the barking of the dog, I think it was, or something, and it turns out to be a baby that was crying.
Mm-hmm. Right.
The whole same kind of thing that John did the same thing with his sister. It's a neat piece of the story to build on that, because that was something that was long forgotten. And for readers like myself who didn't read that old story, it comes a little out of the blue, but knowing that history makes it a better story and makes it resonate better.
Sure.
So, but thank you so much for that. So our next voicemail, or our next piece of feedback, is from Tomar. So go ahead, power ring, and let us know what Tomar's got to say.
Our next message is from Tomar. He has a question about Green Lantern Kyle Rayner and Dark Crisis. Transmitting message in 3, 2, 1.
Hi Myron and Phil. I'll caveat this by saying that I'm waiting for the trade for Dark Crisis and not reading it monthly. But based on some of your comments in episode 214 about Kyle's disappearance, I'm curious if you think there's any link to the DC round robin pitch where the Kyle and Kilowog story made it deep into the bracket. Any chance that miniseries is still lingering and has the potential to be published?
Tomar, here's a quick response to that. That's a big no, only because I don't think DC is that smart to do that. I mean, it would be a cool idea to see the Kyle Kilowog thing come miraculously to life, but your comment actually makes sense. DC wouldn't be bright enough to pull that kind of a move.
Yeah, I agree, and he's not reading the Dark Crisis book right now, so he doesn't know about the what we're talking about necessarily in detail. But sure. The way the story reads, without spoiling it, is we know that Kyle went missing during the Jeff Thorne run, and this picks up right on that plot. So there's not really a good way to make that round robin story fit into that continuity, but there's no reason it couldn't happen after we get done with this whole Dark Crisis stuff. I agree with you, Phil. I don't think DC will pick up on those things. I think they're going to look at that as these are things that are in the past and we're not going to bring them forward again, which I think is a shame because there was certainly some fan interest in it.
Well, I mean, and clearly that's working against them because Marvel has shown that it clearly works. I mean, they're bringing Hugh Jackman back. On to the next listener.
Yeah. Well, yeah. It just to add one piece of detail before we jump to the next one. I think you and I have talked about the whole round robin thing being kind of a cluster from the get-go because it creates these fan battles that don't need to be there. If they just take those stories and publish a chapter of it and let people see you see what the response is, what could hurt? If we go back to the whole idea I had of a Tales of the Green Lantern Corps backup feature, that's a perfect story you could put in there.
Right, and it doesn't cost you anything.
No, not at all.
A writer giving you 5 pages, 10 maybe?
Yeah. I mean, why would it be a problem? I mean, it could even be a one shot.
But you're talking about DC, and they have problems, so anything else is a problem.
You're right. All right. Well, and the next pieces of feedback we've got are a continuation. If you remember last episode, we had some questions from our friend Ken, and we didn't get through them all. So this is the next part of Ken's questions. So Power Ring, why don't you play the first one?
Hi Myron and Phil. How would you merge the Green Lantern characters with Lord of the Rings? This is something I thought of back in 2015 when DC was doing their movie variants at the tail end of the New 52. I was super disappointed by the 2 we got for GL, and I thought, the perfect combination for a comic series about power rings is a movie/book series about magic rings. So, if the Lantern characters were in the LOTR universe, these are some of the characters I think they would be. FYI, I'm not a huge fan of LOTR, I only watch the movies and barely read The Hobbit, so if you have any better comparisons/mergers, please let me know. Frodo Kyle Rayner, Aragorn Hal Jordan, Legolas Jon Stewart, Gandalf Ganthet, Saruman Krona, Gimli Kilowog, Arwen Carol Ferris, Bilbo Alan Scott, Sauron Necron, Boromir Sinestro, Gollum Larfleeze, Eowyn Katmatui, Sam Guy Gardner, Mary Simon, Pippin Jess/Kelly, and the ring to rule them all, the Phantom Ring.
Hey, Ken, thanks so much for the feedback and comments on Lord of the Rings. It's interesting because Green Lantern is always, obviously, is an obvious tie-in or connection to Lord of the Rings just because of the rings thing, right? I don't know myself. I'm not really, like you, I haven't read the books. I've only watched the movies. But I like your comparisons and mergers. I really didn't see anything that I would change. I think you kind of nailed it right on the head. I loved Necron as Sauron in particular. I thought that was great. Sinestro's Boromir is really a good tie-in as well. And Larfleeze and Gollum, I mean, perfect pairing. So, I don't have anything to expound upon it. How about you, Phil? I know you're not really into Lord of the Rings either.
Nah, I'm a Game of Thrones person, man. But, I mean, kudos to Ken for coming up with this list of characters. I can honestly say I don't know enough about any of those characters to know whether the ones you chose fit, but I'm sure that I'm sure you got a better judgment than I do. I will say that since I've been getting into Game of Thrones and reading the books and Martin's stuff and everything like that, it's I've gotten some mad ideas in my head going on about a Green Lantern universe that would take place in the Game of Thrones style of realm back in medieval times, and it would work perfectly.
Cool. All right, Power, why don't you give us the next part of Ken's questions?
I can't remember if I already asked this, but with everything going on in GL over the last year, do you think Simon was right to carry another weapon? And should the other Lanterns carry extra weapons, armor, and tools? Personally, I don't think so, but with an asterisk. It's a lot like a lightsaber. It would technically be logical for Jedi to carry a blaster, but it causes the lightsaber to feel less special and powerful. There's nothing as powerful as a lantern ring/lightsaber, so why bother with other tech? Thorne technically made a point that lanterns shouldn't be fully dependent on the rings, with Isomod and Arisia dying in space, but he never actually has the lanterns learn from that mistake and has them just repeat it and go back to normal at the end like nothing happened. For Simon, I wouldn't mind him carrying other weapons and tools, since it would make sense he wouldn't fully trust the ring after Koyos and Lost Army, and it would be a good part of his character and style to distinguish him from other lanterns, but carrying a regular pistol from Earth just sounds stupid to me. A friend of mine pointed out, Simon has an entire universe's worth of technology at his fingertips, but he chooses to stick with a pistol he got on his first day? Never mind that it has limited bullets too, and I doubt he could easily get a resupply. His last defense against Darkseid or Atrocitus is a pistol? Just plain old dumb right there. Why not have a jet pack from the Ranians, a club from the Thanagarians, and medical technology from Korugar/Sligia then? It would be a fun way to introduce fans to more corners of the DCU.
Okay, so we're talking weapons. I'll flat out say I think the Simon Baz weapon thing was ignorant. I'm not saying that to be mean. That's just my really, really, really critical response to it. Because at the same time, I don't think lanterns need weapons. I don't feel like now, don't get me wrong, there's a lot of evil lanterns out there that are killers and everything, I grant it, but I don't think that's implied when it comes to being a ring bearer, whether you're whatever spectrum you're a part of, unless you're a hardcore villain. But I don't know. I just always been against the whole weapon thing. I just don't think it's relevant. I mean, the ring speaks for itself. And to be quite honest with you, your mind is the weapon, because your mind is what helps you control what your ring creates anyway. So, I mean, what better weapon do you have than your mind?
Yeah, I was never a really big fan of the whole idea of Simon Baz having a pistol. I just felt like it kind of undermined the character a little, but at the same time, I understand this is someone who didn't have the luxury of the training and didn't know if he could trust using the ring, because maybe he didn't feel he was worthy of it. But I think in the long run, I don't know. Like Ken points out, it's kind of dumb to think that if your power ring doesn't work and you're fighting Darkseid or Atrocitus, you're going to pull a pistol out and it's going to do anything for you, right?
That'd be right. Like pulling out a handgun against a dinosaur.
Right, right. Who brings a knife to a power ring fight, right? But I'm not sure what would be a good suitable thing to carry as an extra thing. I mean, I get the point too. You know, we've seen from things with Koyos and this whole, the Lost Army and things we've had in the past where the rings have gone bad. That would it be a bad idea to have a backup plan? I don't know, because what backup plan would be strong enough to help you in a situation where a power ring wouldn't be there for you?
A backup battery.
Yeah, right. It's the new Tesla power ring, you know. I'm not sure what would be a good backup weapon, but I can understand it. Like, you know, if you make the analogy to a Jedi, you know, Jedis carry their lightsabers, but they can certainly make use of other things. But really, a lightsaber is not the Jedi's greatest strength. It's through your ability to use the Force. A lightsaber just becomes a conduit for that. And when you're talking Green Lantern, everything revolves around that power ring. So I'm not sure what would be a suitable sidearm to have or a backup weapon to have. But it certainly does kind of make sense to have something. I just don't know what it would be. I don't know.
I'm telling you, man, it's the life we live in. If your charge runs out, if you don't have a backup battery, you're screwed. And that's what needs to happen here, Ken. These guys need to have a backup battery. That's the only thing. I will add that I wish we had the technology that these rings had for keeping a charge included in our cell phones.
All right. Well, there's one more part to Ken's question. So go ahead, Power Ring, and give it to us.
What if the Green Lanterns had to replace the Justice League? Who would you have protect Earth? I know in the 80s there was a team after Crisis, but who would you have replaced the likes of Superman, Batman, and Wonder Woman? Here are my choices. Superman, Sodam Yat. Batman, Joe Mullen. Wonder Woman, Boudica. Flash, KRKKZZ Zapple. Aquaman, Penelopes. Atom, Liesel Pon. Black Canary, Rotlop Fan. Swamp Thing, Medphil. Martian Manhunter, Sarek/Srilvrek. Cyborg, Stel.
So Ken, thanks for thinking about this. It's interesting to think about what Green Lantern characters go along in the roles of the Justice League, or at least are similar to them. And I love your matchups. I love Boudica as Wonder Woman, in particular, is one of my favorites. Rotlop Fan and Black Canary, what a great tie together. Medphil and Swamp Thing are logical choices. And Stel and Cyborg is like the obvious one. And Sodam Yat and Superman, all perfectly great choices. So I kudos for you for thinking about how you would tie those things together. I think you've done such a perfect job. I know I couldn't do any better.
Well, I will say, I'll give him mad props about the Sodam Yat Superman connection, because Sodam Yat's a Daxamite. So I think he has the same kind of powers as a Kryptonite does, Kryptonian does.
And I also thought it was interesting too. He didn't use, except for Joe Mullane, he didn't use any of the Earth Lanterns.
Oh yeah, that's a good point. You're right. Those are good choices.
Yeah.
I don't know who I'd fill in those places. The Boudica one would be tough to top. He nailed it with the Wonder Woman. Yeah,
definitely. I think it's interesting. I think it's neat. Liesel Pon and the Atom. It's great. You know, Martian Manhunter and using Sarek, which a lot of people forget about Sarek. It's cool.
We need to challenge Ken to something. So he's done Lord of the Rings. Now he's done the Justice League. I wonder what core members he'd use for, like, man, we need to think of something good for him.
Well, you just mentioned Game of Thrones, so you could.
Yeah, I'll tell you what, Ken. I'll challenge you to it, man. But you might have a fight on your hands if I get a hold of you. I'll challenge you. Come up with some Green Lanterns that you think would fill the roles of some of the prominent characters in Game of Thrones. I'll give you a challenge. You can even shoot it to my email if you want.
All right. Well, thanks for all the feedback. We appreciate having you guys reach out to us and ask us some interesting questions and get our juices flowing and thinking about some things that maybe we wouldn't normally think about. Power Ring, why don't you go ahead and tell people how they can be a part of the show?
You can become a part of the show by leaving a message up to 1 minute long on our voicemail line. Call us at 406-POD-OA. That's 406-763-6362. You can also email us at podcast@blogofoa.com. We'd love to hear from you.
All right, Myron, we were delayed, but we found each other once again, and here we are. And this was a great episode. I had fun. Ken, I can't wait to challenge Ken to his Game of Thrones challenge. Get it done, Ken. Let's see what you got. I'm anxious to hear.
Yeah. And I really enjoyed doing the top 5 thing. Like I said, it forces me to rethink things and think about all the different characters out there, because some of them we haven't seen in so long. They're kind of underappreciated. And even though they might not make the top 5, it kind of makes you remember things that you kind of shifted aside. And off mic, in between segments, you came up with a great idea for our next episode. So why don't you go ahead and announce what we're going to do in the next one?
That's right. So we're going to pick our top 5 favorite female characters in the Lantern universe. Any Lantern book, could be anybody in any corps, anywhere, any planet.
Supporting character, villain, hero.
Any space, could be the multiverse, could be anywhere.
But it has to have a connection to Green Lantern in some way, right?
No. Just got to be a female character in the realm of the Lanternverse.
Gotcha. There you go. Perfect. So, if between now and the time we record, if you have some that stand out to you guys, please shoot us an email or a voicemail, and we'd like to include that in it as well.
Yeah, that'd be kind of fun, because what we can do is, if you get some feedback from it, we'll just go ahead and throw it in at the same time we're talking about ours.
What I think I might do is put something in the Facebook group, and then we can do like my number 5, your number 5, and then listener's choice number 5.
That's a good idea. That'd be fun.
Yeah, it'll be different.
Awesome.
All right, my friends. Well, thanks again for tuning in, and thank you for letting us be a part of your Green Lantern fan experience. We will be back soon. We're going to give you guys a couple weeks to get us some feedback on the top 5 female characters. So until next time, my friends, keep that power ring charged and make every day your brightest day. The Podcast of OA is the official podcast of the Blog of OA and a proud member of the Comics Podcast Network. Share your comments and questions by calling the show's voicemail line at 406-POD-OA. That's 406-763-6362. You can send your emails to podcast@blogofoa.com. You can also find the Blog of OA and the Podcast of OA on Twitter and Facebook. Green Lantern and other related characters are the copyrighted property of DC Comics Incorporated and are used without permission. The Blog of OA and the Podcast of OA are fan productions and do not claim any ownership over the Green Lantern or any other copyrighted properties.